Yay! I always feel like after the round of applause, I need to say something super inspiring, like, it's time to change your life today, or something about timeshares, or I don't know, but either way. Welcome to Content Strategy Part 2. Last week, we covered lots of ground. We had a lot of interesting conversations about collaboration, how to work better in each other's teams, specific pain points to your guys' daily jobs and companies. So yeah, I thought we had a lot of really good conversations. I hope that this week, I kind of posted some homework a little late, but were you guys able to see or at least think about some of those questions or assignments and articles I shared? Raise your hand, yes. Sweet. Well, I did the homework, and yeah, so basically what the homework was just to talk to someone at your organization and just practice our listening like we did last week. It's an extension of the listening activity where you had to sketch something out as you're listening to what they were saying and relaying back to you. We could probably do that later today a little bit. So today, based on some of our feedback from last week, I wanted to focus on a couple examples of work I've done in the past as to what some of those content strategy tools are that I use, and then kind of extend those into some activities where we can break into small groups and really focus on diving into how you create a persona or an identity for your brand or your website or your application, and then how do we funnel that into, let's start playing with some lightweight personas for individual people. So the UX people in the room, you'll probably be very good at this, which is awesome. And then part 3 of that will be, how do we apply this to voice and tone? We got a few questions last week about voice and tone. There seemed to be a lot of interest about that. And since that's one of my favorite things to do, I'm like, okay, let's kind of focus in on that tool today. We also will be talking a little bit about a couple areas that we went over very quickly last week. Like a little bit about meetings and a little bit about marketing. I know we had a couple people in the room that were really interested in trying to understand content marketing and where that fits in with content strategy. So those are some topics we will talk about as well. Is there any other topic or something that you've been thinking about during the week from session 1 that you'd like more information about?
Testing.
Oh, testing? Okay.
That doesn't fit within this, maybe off-channel conversation.
Okay, awesome.
So I had a question as it relates to something we were talking about last week. If you're okay with me posing the question now.
Let's do it.
So you had been discussing meeting with people ahead of time and aligning for goals that when you come into a meeting, you can already know what their goals are if they're not willing to say them themselves. I was in a meeting this week where I had met with everybody ahead of time and they all had different goals. They're all owners of the project. I'm sure you've been in a similar scenario where there's been a couple of alternate goals in the same project, and I just didn't know if you had any tips or tricks that you've used to kind of circumvent that scenario?
Yes. So I really like a word called consensus. Like, how do we find consensus, especially in a meeting? And how do we set a goal for a meeting if everyone's coming from a different place? I guess a couple things is if the goals are totally different and there's not common ground or you can't find consensus, maybe they should be broken into separate meetings. You know, maybe you should speak to those different stakeholders through different meetings. Or if it's just a barrier of language and a barrier in how these different disciplines are coming at a problem, then I think that could be a good opportunity to be like, are there similarities in these goals or pain points? So yeah, I guess, were they differing on business goals or design?
It's all business partners that are working with our marketing design team.
Okay.
You know, and everything that they have is of course the most important. So it's an overarching web redesign that we're approaching. And so they all want things to look different, whereas we want pages to have a similar intuitive feel when you get to different business groups, right? But their content needs to come first. So there's at least lowest common denominator scenario here. It was just a difficult one for us to approach.
Yeah, that can be tough. Was the meeting based around a particular page of the site, or was it?
We were meeting with the individual stakeholders to show, like, here's the templates we've derived that, you know, general content we found we fit into. You know, they all want, you know, so I work at Nationwide, so it's want this type of insurance up here on anybody's page, not just on our page, sort of conversation.
Ah, okay.
My stick's bigger than yours.
Yeah. I know I think that's probably something I run into on almost every project. And a lot of it, I think, does come down to, obviously you look at the business goals, but then you can also look at like the interaction or the audience goals. So sometimes the common ground you'll find is the audience goals. So if that's in conflict with the business goal, it's like, okay, well, why is this business goal performing? Is it not performing? Is it, and you kind of look at it from the business eye. If it is performing, it's like, okay, great, I don't know how if it's not meeting the audience goals, but I think that sometimes speaking back to the audience can help bring those groups together and maybe understand design decisions a little bit. If they are completely different and you're not making progress, I would definitely probably recommend maybe doing like, maybe taking a different approach to how those meetings are structured or how you get feedback from those different parties. Yeah, I don't know, but.
Well, you had said something about, doing, like, the user testing would be great, and the A/B testing are just like the initial meeting, and once we get some feedback and show them, here's what our user wants, I'm sure it'll come around, but
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's some other things I like to do depending on how your design, like I kind of have like normally I work in a kind of hybrid agile approach, and I'll organize things in different batches. Sometimes if there's really tricky or tough questions on the business goal side or the marketing side, I'll like punt it to the next batch. I'm like, hey, I understand your pain point and what your problem is, but we really need to figure this one thing out first. But I'm gonna make sure I understand that, and maybe we'll focus on that next week, or maybe we'll focus on that next, just to try to keep myself sane, like, okay, we need to solve this first, but then making sure that that business stakeholder is being heard. And then the other tactic I like to use sometimes too is just, wow, that's a really good goal. We're actually solving for this goal right now, but I think that can help us, it's to help get their brain to think about the other person's problem first, and then we'll fix yours. So yeah, I think those are some lightweight things, but yeah, again, I'd love to dive more deeply into that, maybe off channel, because it is something there's a lot. It's tough. In these big enterprise projects, there's lots of stakeholders, there's lots of different decision makers, people have different goals. And today I'll share some examples of a project I worked on where there were probably 3 or 4 actually more than that, stakeholders. And I thought maybe that'll help as well, answer some of your questions. So.
Kind of a personal question.
Yeah.
When you do the ugly deliverables, do you ever run into like issues because people can't understand exactly what you're trying to deliver to them?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, like if you can cut back and only do that once you have a more common, like streamlined idea, I guess, it would be so nice. But
Yeah, sometimes if no one's really. So last week we talked a little bit about ugly deliverables like content mapping or, taxonomy or things that really prioritize text or even code snippets. And it's sometimes is funny if someone's not used to seeing these types of things, the look on their face when they're like, I thought you were designing something, and then they see something that looks like this. It's like, oh. Kind of pulls the air out of the room a little bit until you kind of explain why that process is. So I've tried to do a better job of actually setting up for that expectation when I plan out a batch or a sprint. It's like, hey, this is why we're doing it this way. And when I am working more closely with the design team, it's nice to have like something lightweight and ugly along with some visual elements that the design team's starting to pull together. So you kind of have this loop. Yeah, but that is fun. So and I have a couple examples that I can share of some of my content prototypes or maps, and then what the end product looked like. So little.
To add to that too, when it's kind of taken away from the design and people are focusing on the content, it comes to a discussion purely on.
which I love, like that idea. When Eric and I were driving home last week, I was like, that is
Yeah.
Yeah.
because so much time people are like, well, I don't like this part of the navigation on the content. You're
Yeah.
like, who cares? Let's talk about what we're putting in there right now.
Yeah, and it's really nice when you're talking about responsive web design, even just a content hierarchy of why are these things on this page and what's the most important order. I'm not really making any layout decisions. I'm just purely trying to look at qualitative or quantitative data, like, oh, there's a lot of traffic going to this site or this page. If we do have some lightweight research or even a really in-depth research about our experience architecture where customers are coming in and out, again, that can really help you be like, okay, that's why this content should come first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And yeah, I'm not even trying to make a layout decision. So I've had scenarios happen where, once the design team gets to the hierarchy, they're like, oh, great, but if we handle it this way, that puts more prominence on it, so it doesn't necessarily have to be this strict order. But at least it starts those conversations about why this needs to live here, or why this should exist, or what needs to be improved. I think that's where maybe taking it out of the realm of like personal taste, I think, can help with the ugly deliverable. So testing. Did you have a specific question about testing that we should?
We really don't do A/B testing.
Okay.
And I want to get into that. I want to know a little bit more. So
Okay,
I'm not sure if
awesome.
that's ubiquitous enough to fit, with the topics today.
Yeah, maybe at the end, let's try to touch on it. It's something that I definitely support the testing process a lot in my daily job. I'm not, so yeah, I think that'd be good conversations from that. Awesome. So I'm going to share any other questions. I might just share some examples because I think that might inspire some more conversation. I'm going to share 2 examples today. One is an example of a project that's a smaller business. It was a smaller team. And with that, it's actually a marketing website. And we had to kind of do a quicker, more lightweight approach to how we thought about the content, how we thought about audience goals. So I want to use that as an example of where even on small teams, you can kind of use content strategy as like a quick gut check, or you can use some user experience principles as a quick gut check to make sure that you're trying to head down the right path. You're trying to put the user and the audience first. And again, it didn't really lean on a ton of in-depth research because of like time and different like other constraints on the project, but it was good to take that extra week to interview the right people, to slow down a little bit, to make sure the sitemap was being aligned with content goals. So yeah, I'll share that project first, and then the second project I'll share is an enterprise project where there's lots of moving parts, lots of stakeholders. It was more in depth in terms of the content strategy deliverables. Yeah. So what? Yeah. We're good right now. Yeah. So the first project, it was a local company, Charles Penzone, and Sorry, I'm going through my files. And what we did was we were creating a microsite for bridal. I'll open this one first. And so they had a need where they do a lot of, you don't have permission. So basically, it's Charles Penzone salons. They do hair, makeup, lots of the spa experience. And they do a lot of marketing activities around bridal. And what they found was where, 10 years ago, bridal used to be very seasonal, like summer, fall, etc. It's really now what they're finding because of trends and when there's kind of a theme year-round for brides. So their sales have continuously grown to where they're kind of consistent year-round. And their current website wasn't really facilitating those sales leads in an effective manner. And they were going to begin actually redoing their main website in the near future. So they had this need where, okay, we want to serve brides now. We don't want to wait for our full web redesign to be done to do that. What are some ideas? So what we did, I worked with a couple local designers and developers, and we just tried to make a plan to make a microsite experience that targets brides. And so our first few steps was just looking at the business goals, what they wanted to accomplish, what they needed, where they thought they could better serve brides online. And some of those conversations brought up some really cool things about where they wanted to take their brand overall, even outside of the bridal audience. So what that did was it helped us prioritize the type of audience and who they needed to speak to. The main goal was they wanted to be more relevant with millennial brides, so the younger bride demographic. And then we looked at the residual audiences outside of that. So we kind of made a list of priorities. So we made a list of priorities based on those audience types. So based on that, you come up with some simple themes that are sometimes common sense, like, okay, this is going to be a responsive site. It needs to be X, Y, or Z. It needs to do this. It needs to speak in this certain way to target this audience. And then I kind of pulled it together in a document called a brand on page, which I can show you some templates later. I can share some templates I use for brand on page, which is very kind of marketing world that kind of comes from my background in marketing and branding. But yeah, so I mean, this is an example of, again, just a brief that I would take based on interviews with the client and their business stakeholders. I would compile something like this that I would then work with my design team to talk about. And I'll share that, I'll send this out. But basically it just looks at like, who's their current guest, who are their prospects, where are they reaching these people, and then what's like secondary audiences. Using these things, I talk to the internal brand owners or the marketing people internally to find out what are some traits of their current customers, which ones apply to customers that they want to bring into the fold. And so, kind of like I said earlier, it might not be 100% accurate or research backed, but at least it's a starting point for these quick projects or these marketing projects that help build like some alignment and consensus between visual design, between even development, and then also the marketing and brand stakeholders, the business leaders, where they're like, oh, so that's why you're making this decision, or when you recommend this copy change, you're really thinking about our audience, which again, seems like a common sense thing, but it's amazing what you'll learn in these conversations that you might have overlooked. Some of these early conversations on this particular project helped us prioritize a better like lead funnel, or helped us prioritize how they actually follow back up with brides, and what those touch points look like after you experience the website. So while we were tasked with designing the website, we kind of uncovered some interesting things about the business that made us a very valuable vendor for them. This is really small, so sorry, but so some of the brand on page elements, this is actually a really cool template. My brother-in-law shared it with me. He's a brand manager for a few really big companies. One that he used to be a brand manager for was actually Jim Beam, and they have all these different personas and brand on pages for each persona. And what it does is it just tries to look at your positioning for a product and what that means. So we looked at bridal as a product of Charles Penzone. And so what does that mean for their demographic of women? And so we just tried to get some there's these key terms in a brand on page, like positioning, what's your purpose, who's the person, what's the insight of that person. And it's just kind of distilling it down to very simple ideas that you can reinforce visually. And then what's the proof? How's the brand meeting these promises? For example, of proof, we said, Charles Penzone has been preparing brides since 1969. They have this deep, rich legacy and history in this industry. So it's like, okay, cool, let's run with that. What does that mean? What does that mean to the millennial bride? What does that mean to these different decision makers in that process? I'll share this document. Does anyone have questions about brand on page or what this lightweight research, how you would go about doing this?
So this is mostly hypothetical. You might test this later, but this is just off the top of the head.
Yes. Yep. And a lot of this is based on, I'll say, like qualitative research, like phone interviews or in-person interviews, where I would meet with, in this example, I actually met with a couple bridal coordinators and spoke to them about, aspirational things about the brand, day-to-day pain points, and then I actually talked to two customers that had gone through that experience. So it's, a little lightweight research. What can I learn in like 10 minutes to 30 minutes with each person? And then relaying those findings into kind of a hypothesis, like a lightweight document. For a longer term and again, this is something that, kind of nitty gritty, get it done in a week, tries to put you down the right path. Versus if it's a longer term project, it's like, okay, cool, let's get these ideas out there, but then what should we test or what should we take further? Especially for a project that might not be as focused as this. You could do a lot of different kind of industry verticals or brand on pages for different audience types. So kind of taking some of that research and then some of their existing like print collateral, which is kind of nice looking stuff like this, which my friend Natalie, she's an amazing designer, had a really good pulse on their brand and has worked with this client for a long time. So that made a lot of things just flow really nicely. And they had a lot of nice print collateral. So there was this challenge to be like, okay, how do we leverage print collateral or brand assets that exist offline to have an appropriate voice online? What makes sense, what fits, what doesn't fit. And yeah, then kind of going back to what those organizational goals were for the audience type. So yeah, essentially, it's, at the end of the day, we're just trying to validate them online and provide a lead funnel to get brides in the fold. And yeah, oh yeah, and then this is really ugly. You guys can laugh. Ha ha ha. So this is fun. I feel like every time I do a sitemap, I don't know why, I do it different. It's stupid and weird. But this was just kind of trying to say, like, here's how do we apply some of that research into like particular pages. And some of these didn't even end up being separate pages, but it just was saying, what's the goal of, an about page? It's like, oh, let's try to present ourselves as being makers. We're working in beauty. Let's show that we put people over process. So there's some of these terms that we pull out of the research of how to target a millennial bride. What's the supporting evidence of this? Network. Okay, we have all these hairstylists of different styles and traits that can serve you in very unique, different ways. Again, who's the bridal coordinator? That's the person that's walking you through this whole process. How do we educate them about that? So again, it's just trying to look at the sitemap as, over time this will become more structural, but at this level, it's just trying to say, what are those things we need to speak to as we develop content for this website? Yeah. Oh yeah, and then I have my little kind of other list of things that we might need and my little cool navigation key element. And then there's other documents, but for the most part, that's that's just try to give you a little sample of, okay, even on a small project or small business project, there's ways that you can do champion research and really simple, easy, approachable things that really anyone can do. It doesn't really take a content strategist or a UX person. Kind of goes back to last week, we were talking about Socratic method and just asking questions, just being a good listener, trying to remove your own bias from the project. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a bride. I probably don't have the same decision-making things that would go through a bride-to-be's head when they're trying to book a hair thing. But yeah, I had to kind of step outside of that, and just it was good that I'm an outsider to ask those questions and really figure out, oh, why would they want to do this? I don't know. Why would they spend $1,000, on hair or whatever? So, anyways, the final site, it was definitely a fun project. There was different things we prioritized, like imagery over like some use of copy. We integrated they do a lot of event marketing, so we integrated hashtags from Instagram because they do all these different bridal shows. Their individual hairstylists also have their own hashtags where, while they're getting brides ready, they'll take photos. So just kind of this way to make the brand more lively, fun, approachable for the younger audiences, while trying to prioritize, what are their different opportunities or, offerings as an organization. So, yeah. anyways, that's kind of going from that lightweight research to those ugly Word documents to funny sitemaps to starting to build little components. And we actually used InVision a lot for some prototypes and wireframes. And there's the whole other aspect of the project I didn't touch on, but offline or on Slack, I can definitely share you more of that process that took it from ugly deliverables to then final product.
Andy, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So in like this site and gathering the content, this seems very image heavy. Was that part of the strategy?
Oh yeah, totally.
With that, I always feel like that's a stupid trend. People love big images and they don't actually have the images done. That's the stupid part of it.
Yes.
Do you have any experience with kind of navigating content that you've done with imagery versus just,
Yes. So there's a couple different from the journalism industry and even from like the media industry. There's different ways you can achieve different voice and tones with your visual decisions. So for this bridal website, photography, they had a lot of photography assets, so that was a strength of the brand. But then also, we wanted to take a point of view approach to speaking to the audience. And a point of view approach would be like, it could be a video showing a walk in the life of video would be a point of view approach. Photography, like, that kind of shows processy oriented things like this. She's looking in the mirror. It's kind of sharing her point of view. That use of photography helped us achieve our goals of being like relevant, trying to speak to an individual person, backing up statements like they had in their print collateral that like, let us capture your beauty, like trying to craft that message of maker and one-to-one approach, personality, personability. I think that's where you can kind of take that further and what type of photography do we need. I've actually worked on projects in the past where we've actually made the decision to limit photography because of the voice and tone and what we wanted to achieve. Here's an older site I worked on, probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And this was kind of the opposite, actually, where it's a mental health resource website. And we actually didn't do much research, and we kind of jumped into a really cool design right away because we're like, firefighters, let's go get cool photos. And our first version of this site was like a sweet, awesome splash page of like these firefighters like running into a burning building or something. And then, and I'm glad we just prototyped that first. It was all just static HTML, CSS, because when I started to actually sit down, it's a mental health resource for firefighters about like PTSD, suicide prevention. There's like hundreds of articles, resource articles. And so after we had this prototype done, because we were all excited about making it look cool, I actually sat down with the psychologist and I'm just like, oh yeah, so we have all these anchor tags to articles, and it just wasn't working for the, what firefighters cared about for this particular resource site was that it's anonymous, it's built locally, they're finding the best research from other psychologists. It's approved by the city, but it's not run by the city because, again, there's this kind of barrier to they're being employed by the city. If they're giving up personal information, they want to make sure it's not tied to their... So yeah, we kind of like downplayed it, and we realized we had to make it probably just a more resource-driven, a more research-driven thing that gives them quicker access to member services, but then differentiate outside resources from member services. So I guess this would be an example of where we actually had to pull it away from that point of view approach because it does talk about a lot of vulnerable things. And if they see a photo of like a firefighter looking like a hero, they're not in a place, when they come to this website, they're not in a place where they're like, rah, rah, yeah, I'm a firefighter. They're in a place of vulnerability. And if they recognize a face on this website of another firefighter, they might like, ooh, I'm out. I'm not going to log in or take this stress assessment or do these things that we're asking them to do. So that's something where maybe that lightweight research up front might have helped steer us a different direction instead of redesigning everything 3 months later. But yeah, does that answer your question of use of photography or video or?
But the exact opposite example where someone wants to inject those images.
Oh, yeah. I would say to that is A, do you have the assets or the photography already in your marketing mix? If you don't, as a web provider or a designer, I mean, I would want to prioritize that. Like, okay, well, let's work with the photographer if you think that's important, or why do you think that's important? Who are you trying to target or talk to? When we work on some personas or what your web personality is later in an activity, I think that can help going through some of those exercises with clients. Because, yeah, I think there is a big trend right now where, yeah, the big splash image, and then I'll put a button there to sign up, and then the person gives you like a stock photo, and it's like, oh, this is really bad for usability. It's not even your own photo. It's just convenient, or you think it looks cool. I think it is somewhat of a problem, too. I mean, there's a lot of amazing things happening in the web, like the democratization of the web, like Squarespace, and these amazing tools where people can really build a website really quickly. But I do think photography can be a pain point because they're like, this template looks so good, I want this. And then they don't have any photos, and it doesn't look like a website because they don't have any photos. So yeah, there's this weird balance of mixed media and how that helps support web design, but then also how it can actually hurt your brand if it's not done appropriately. Yeah, so I think our exercises later will give us some tools we can use to help in that process. All right, so I'll do another. Does anyone have questions working with small business or working with your own, like if you're a freelancer, how you can take a lightweight approach to research, or how you can find like your voice and tone for a web project based on the examples I just shared? No, want me to go on to,
So, I guess, just to piggyback a little bit off of the last conversation, so in the case where, let's say you have a client that wants something very elaborate and fancy, and their goals and their eventual users probably would benefit from that, but they want you to like craft it out of thin air, and then when you do your best with what they have, there's this like perception of value that they're like, well, that's not what I wanted, like that's not what we can do. Like, how do you deal with that sometimes?
Yeah.
I feel like that's
A lot of that, yeah.
like really small signs, but
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it comes down to expectations during and project management through those expectations of these are the services we're providing, and these are the areas where we want to create value for your business. If they're giving you something that's going to hinder that ability for you to provide value, I think that's where there needs to be a little bit, like if their assets are weak, or let's say their logo is a nice logo in context of print or on a truck or in a different thing, but maybe it needs to be refined slightly for a website. I mean, I think that's where you can kind of bring up those tough conversations for, hey, if we want to achieve this goal, would you be willing to do X or to do a change order for this? Not that it has to be like a complete rebrand or that it has to be a whole new budget for photography, but are there some easy wins where you can help guide them through that process? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to connect, you're trying to connect them to their audience type. So if there's a better way to do it, most of the time businesses are receptive to that. And it doesn't even mean that you need to do that work. I've worked for a client before where I was like, hey, do you have a camera or do you know someone with a camera? I need these types of photos. Can you get those? Because those would be better than what you have already, or those would be better than, and those conversations can be tough, but I think inviting them back into the process, I think empowers them. And then we're the service provider. We're trying to, they don't know all the answers, and that's why they're hiring us. So I think that's kind of one way. A good example, my buddy, he's a really good writer, and he actually talks a little bit about how you advocate for the client's business goals versus, just always saying yes or just always doing tasks for them. So my friend Austin, he has an article he recently published called "Sell What People Are Buying," and he had this client that worked in I can't even say the word, basically like dental surgery, and like dentation, and he kept butting heads with his client because his client wanted to use these really big terms and words because that's how him and his peers spoke to each other. So a lot of times in small business, you're kind of stuck in your channel because you're measured against your peers or competitors, and you speak in this very interesting language, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what your audience hears. He kind of writes in this article, as a rule of thumb, if you're using words your customers have to look up in a dictionary, then hire a writer to make the content more accessible. So I think this can apply to like photography or assets. It's like, how do we design something or create something that's most accessible to your audience? And that's where I love voice and tone. But for him, he goes back to talking about this client, and it's, the problem for the audience isn't that these fancy words or the science behind it or whatever. It's, they want to have a nice smile. They want to be able to, they care about being able to eat a caramel apple or corn on the cob. So it's like, let's speak to that. Visually, how do we speak to that? How's the copy speak to that? So don't sell me on being this fancy surgeon, dental surgeon. Sell me on a transformation. So I think keeping it back to business goals can help bring them into the process and help understand, like, hey, we're trying to increase your business, your sales, your X, and this is how we can do that together. And that's why we need this, or that's why we need this from you. So I think that's one way that is good, bring it back to the goals. And yeah, I'll link this article. It's a good, fun read. So, any other questions?
Can I make a note on that actually from like the business perspective?
Yeah.
Because it's like that's a problem I definitely run into. One way we've tried to solve that is by doing a project assessment before we actually sign the bid contract. So we do like a couple workshops and then we define those deliverables really explicitly. Like, here's exactly what we delivered based on the assessment. And like they were involved in a workshop and helping define those things. So like then in the middle of the project, they're not asking for things that they don't have resources for. Like we're looking over their assets, we're looking at how they're talking to each other, and we're like, okay, this is a problem, and those go into the proposal, actual project proposal. Like that's been a huge help, honestly. Like just that small little assessment before starting a project has been huge.
But that does not really control customer disappointment at the end of it.
It
Even
doesn't.
when the client is still disappointed at the end, that contract doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that's one
Well.
thing. We've always tried to alleviate that by like always bringing them in the process so that they take responsibility, like even from the very beginning. So like it sets like this precedent. But you're actually clients. That's just an emotional thing. It's so frustrating sometimes. Like they don't understand that.
Bringing
Especially
in
with
new
how
pictures though, that's a good idea.
But I think that's why your ugly deliverables really helps avoid that, because if they see it ugly and realize we have no content, we have no pictures, how is this site gonna happen when I've got nothing for you?
Yeah,
I think that's
like
a
the bare
good-
thing rather than like
Yeah.
rainbows and
It's like,
unicorns.
what's
Yeah.
they show the people on the HGTV show the home they can't afford, and then they're like, all right, we're gonna have to work to
This
build
is
up to
what
that.
you
Yeah,
get.
this is what.
Yeah, absolutely. I love discoveries or mini workshops, especially when the client engages financially at a low amount to figure out some of these problems, and then you present the solutions. I think that's a great tactic. Ugly deliverables. I hate like great reveals. Everyone wants ownership of their project, especially if they're paying money for something. So bringing them into that process and unveiling things slowly and before like a grand reveal. I used to do these awesome reveals. Here's your site. It's all done. It's beautiful. And things are going to change. Like it's just going to happen. But yeah, I mean, you can't win them all. I've had some projects blow up and be bad. And you learn from that and you move on and you try to make it better the next time. But yeah, I really try to push defining those expectations and keeping them in the fold. And if I admitting I'm wrong, sometimes I'm wrong and that's okay. All right, so yeah, voice and tone. I know we've talked about this a lot today already, especially through the examples. Oh yeah, Kevin, we can record now.
Okay.
It's probably already recording, isn't it?
I started recording again.
Awesome. All right, cool. So at a high level, voice and tone helps audit. So if it's an existing site, it can help audit if it's the right content. Are we targeting the right audience? And kind of like that automotive example, like what are the different reasons? What's the timing of authoring the content? And what are the tasks behind the content? And kind of two ways I separate voice and tone is I really think voice is more about the consistency of your brand and how that brand language should play out throughout your interfaces, especially to affect like an emotional response, especially in a marketing context, is like, oh, how are we inviting people into this? Whereas I think tone changes based on the need of a page or the goal of a page. I think that's where you can kind of take like, that's where that MailChimp example I shared last week, they do a lot of stuff with tone where it's like, hey, if there's an alert message, it should be in this style. If there's another message, it should be in this style. And that's a little less about like what that brand voice is and more about, hey, here's how we speak during these different like touch points. So yeah, how do we get to voice and tone? A lot of the voice and tone is reflected of the persona work that UX teams do, or if there is like an experience architecture or like a customer journey. Yeah, don't you do a lot of customer journey mapping, Kim? Yeah, awesome. So that's like a really good starting point to be like, are we good on voice and tone? Are we not good? How do we adapt it? How do we change it? So yeah, going back to a major theme from last week is how do we have all these different disciplines coming together to help make a better project happen? And I think voice and tone's a result of like all these different teams and asking all the right questions to try to build consensus of these stakeholders. Whoops. So, I don't know. I think I'm ready to go into some activities. Are you guys? Yeah. Yeah, let's go. So today I wanted to try to go through 3 exercises, and we can break into maybe 4 teams. And the 3 exercises are just kind of web or product personality. So what do you want your brand, and maybe we can argue amongst teams whose project you pick. And just trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to say who we are? So if you're B2B, if you're B2C, like who's your ideal, not even who your ideal customer is yet, just what do you do? Why is your brand this way? What's the personality of it? That'll be part 1. Part 2 will be more about, okay, let's pick one audience persona type and just do a really lightweight persona. And then part 3 will be, how do we start to now think of like voice and tone adjectives? How do we speak to them? What's one important interface that makes this product or website effective? And let's really audit the voice and tone of that. So it's kind of nitty gritty. I just want to get together, help solve each other's pain points, and start sketching and figuring these things out. So part 1, I have a list of a few questions that can help provide guidelines for how we can do this. Again, name of company. I don't know, I didn't really decide if we wanted to make up a company or if your team wanted to make up a company or actually pick one from your group that you can do and work on together. Do you want to do a vote? Who wants to make up a new idea? One person. Who wants to pick from your group, like a current project you're working on or the company that you have? We are tied 1-1.
Is there a third option?
No.
Brand that we like,
What?
maybe an existing brand.
You could do it, yeah, you could, actually, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do an existing brand. Nice. All right, we'll pick an existing brand. Let's do groups of 4, 3 groups of 4. Let's 1 group, 2 group, and then 3, group 3. Sweet. Done. Cool. All right, we can pause the video and we'll jump in. I'll pass out paper. So the idea behind part of content strategy, a little more emotion than a lot of the other deliverables that are very kind of rigid and ugly sometimes. But voice and tone gives me the opportunity to take things like the content inventory that are really long list driven and really data-driven on page views and other elements, and really start to question the context for things, and to have those creative discussions with designers or with UX professionals about how can we think of things outside the box? Can we think of better opportunities or ways to really help the information architecture or concept new interfaces? So for me, voice and tone is kind of that really creative brand space that I like to play in the content strategy realm. And you can take it a lot of different ways. So, this exercise today, we really focused from the user and the audience, and even looking at your brand as a person, I think helps humanize it and helps you have interesting discussions with clients and team members. And again, it should be fun and lightweight, and then you try to use that to have the tougher discussions later. So that's today and voice and tone, and thank you for participating in today's workshop. As always, feel free to reach out with questions or comments, or pick my brain for other exercises or tools that might be helpful for you and your prospective teams. So thank you, Columbus Web Group. And yeah, that's it. Thanks.